Here is story number 1. The Labyrinth of Lost Signals. It began, as it often does, with curiosity. Caleb was a night owl, a self-proclaimed connoisseur of internet oddities. His evenings were spent in dimly lit rooms, scrolling through message boards, obscure blogs, and forgotten corners of the web. It was never anything malicious, just the thrill of discovery. But one cold January night, Caleb found something he wished he hadn't. It started with a post on a barely active forum called Abyssal Archive. The thread title read, "Has anyone seen the lost signals?" Intrigued, Caleb clicked. The original post was brief, almost cryptic. They're out there, you just have to know where to look. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. Beneath the post, there were scattered comments. Some mocked the idea as nonsense, but others hinted at something darker. "You're not ready," one user warned. Another wrote, "If you find them, don't look too long, they'll look back." Caleb chuckled. He assumed it was just some elaborate internet lore, the kind that thrives on ambiguity. Still, he was intrigued. He copied a few usernames from the thread and started tracing their activity. The users all seemed connected to a hidden network of forums with equally ominous names: the Static Exchange, Hollow Frequencies, Echo Threads. It wasn't long before Caleb stumbled upon a file repository linked in one of the threads. The site was archaic black background, green text, and an unsettling audio hum that played on loop. At the top of the page, a single message was written: "Do not proceed without understanding the cost." Caleb hesitated, his cursor hovering over the first file, Signalone, M4. He clicked. The video opened with distorted static, the kind you'd see on an old TV set. Slowly, an image faded in an empty room with a single flickering light bulb. The camera shook slightly, as if it were held by a trembling hand. In the background, faint whispers overlapped, unintelligible yet unnervingly intimate. Caleb leaned closer to the screen, straining to make out the word. Then the whispers stopped. For a moment, the video was silent except for the faint buzz of the flickering light. Caleb was about to close it when a figure darted across the frame. It was so fast he barely caught it, but he could swear it was a person thin, pale, and moving on all fours. He replayed the clip, pausing at the exact moment the figure appeared. Freezing the frame, he examined it closely. The figure's face was blurred, but its eyes, they were unnaturally large and seemed to shine, even in the grainy footage. Caleb felt a chill crawl up his spine. He closed the file and decided to stop for the night. But sleep didn't come easily. Over the next few days, Caleb's curiosity morphed into obsession. He downloaded more files from the repository, each one more disturbing than the last. There were videos of deserted buildings where shadowy figures loomed just out of focus. Audio recordings of children's laughter distorted into guttural wails. Text files filled with incoherent strings of numbers and phrases like "they're watching and do not let them see you." As Caleb delved deeper, he began noticing strange things in his daily life. His computer started glitching, the screen flickering even when he wasn't using it. He'd hear faint static from his speakers, even when they were turned off. One night, he swore he saw movement in the reflection of his monitor, a pale figure darting past. He told himself it was just paranoia. The videos were clearly fabricated, designed to unsettle, but the line between fiction and reality was blurring. Caleb's friends noticed his change in demeanor. He grew withdrawn, his once lively conversations replaced with vague mutterings about frequencies and hidden signals. One evening, Caleb received an email from an address he didn't recognize. The subject line read, "We've seen you." The body of the email contained only a link. Against his better judgment, he clicked it. The link led to a live stream. The screen showed a room that looked eerily familiar, the same room from the first video he'd watched. But this time, the camera was pointed at a mirror, and in the mirror, Caleb saw himself sitting at his desk. He froze. The live stream was happening now. Before he could react, the camera panned slowly to the left, revealing the pale figure he'd seen in the videos. It was crouched in the corner of the room, staring directly into the camera with its enormous, glowing eyes. Caleb spun around in his chair, but his room was empty. When he looked back at the screen, the figure was gone. The live stream cut to static. Caleb's computer shut off on its own. His room plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the streetlight outside. He sat in silence, heart pounding, unable to shake the feeling that he was no longer alone. The next day, Caleb's friends reported him missing. His apartment was empty, his computer wiped clean. The only trace of him was a sticky note left on his desk with a single message scrawled in shaky handwriting. Don't look for the signals, let them find you. Here is second story. The Lattice beneath. Leila had always been a skeptic. As a journalist specializing in debunking internet conspiracies, she took pride in unraveling hoaxes and exposing online grifters. She dived into everything from fake cryptid sightings to dubious miracle cures, emerging each time with the satisfaction of shedding light on the shadows of misinformation. One night, while researching a piece on obscure conspiracy forums, she stumbled upon a strange mention of something called the Lattice. The name intrigued her not for its obvious mystique, but for its lack of details. It wasn't like the typical conspiracy fodder plastered across forums. Instead, it was whispered about in passing, almost as if it were taboo. She clicked on a thread titled, "Don't Dig Too Deep into the Lattice." The original post was sparse. The Lattice isn't just an idea. It's everywhere, hiding in plain sight. If you find it, it finds you. Ask yourself if you're ready before you start. The responses were equally cryptic. One user claimed to have caught a glimpse of it, but refused to elaborate. Another wrote, "I looked into it and haven't felt alone since." Leila's instincts told her it was another elaborate hoax, perhaps some kind of alternate reality game. But her curiosity had been piqued. She began following links, hopping from one obscure forum to another. Each breadcrumb trail led her to darker corners of the internet, abandoned blogs, password-protected archives, and enigmatic chat rooms filled with users who communicated in riddles. Finally, she found what seemed to be a starting point, a text file hosted on a site that looked as if it hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. The file was titled Instructions, Text. She downloaded it and opened the document. The first line read, "To see the Lattice, you must first open your eyes." Beneath it was a series of steps. Most were mundane, adjusting certain settings on her browser, downloading specific extensions, using a particular VPN configuration. But the final instruction was odd. Search the following coordinates in your Maps application: 47 6180 on 122, 3516 Deg W. Leila recognized those coordinates. They were in Seattle. Curious, she pasted them into her Maps app. They pointed to an ordinary intersection downtown. Nothing stood out. But the Street View image was strange. The usual clarity of Street View was distorted at this location. The image was blurry, with faint streaks of what looked like static. In the middle of the intersection stood a figure, unnervingly tall and thin, with its head slightly tilted. The figure's face was obscured, not by blurring, but by a strange warping effect, as though the image itself couldn't render it properly. Leila leaned closer to her screen, her pulse quickening. She refreshed the page, but the figure was gone. She tried to shake off the unease. It was probably some artifact of the photo stitching process, she reasoned, yet her gut told her otherwise. The next part of the instructions directed her to a specific Tor address. Leila hesitated. She was no stranger to the dark web, but something about this felt heavier. Still, she pressed on. The site she accessed was sparse, just a black screen with a single prompt. Enter your name. Leila typed in her first name. The screen blinked, then displayed a message. "Welcome, Leila. We've been waiting." She froze. There was no logical way the site could know her name unless it had tracked her through some back channel, perhaps through her prior research. But the specificity unnerved her. The site began displaying a stream of images, warped, nightmarish collages of urban landscapes intertwined with organic-looking structures, like veins running through skyscrapers. The images flickered too quickly for her to focus on details. but certain things stuck: a hollow-eyed child standing in an alley, a hand reaching out from beneath a manhole cover, a city skyline distorted as though it were melting into the earth. Then, the screen turned black. Her reflection stared back at her from the monitor, but something was wrong. There was movement behind her. Leila whipped around, heart racing, but her apartment was empty. She turned back to the screen. A new message had appeared. "The lattice surrounds you." Her webcam light blinked on. Panicking, she slammed her laptop shut and yanked the power cord from the wall. The room fell silent except for the sound of her own ragged breathing. She tried to rationalize what had just happened, but every explanation felt hollow. Over the next few days, Leila noticed subtle changes in her surroundings. Shadows seemed deeper, lingering at the edges of her vision. Her reflection in the mirror occasionally felt out of sync, her movements a fraction of a second too late. Her colleagues grew concerned as she became increasingly paranoid. She stopped leaving her apartment, convinced she was being watched. One night, she woke to the sound of static. Her laptop, which she hadn't touched since the incident, was open on her desk, the screen glowing faintly. It displayed a live feed of her own apartment, filmed from an angle she couldn't locate. In the corner of the frame, just barely visible in the dim light, was the tall, thin figure she had seen in the Street View image. It was standing in her bedroom. Leila didn't scream. She couldn't. The static grew louder, filling her ears, drowning out her thoughts. When her coworkers visited her apartment days later, the place was empty. Her laptop sat open on the desk, displaying a single sentence. "The lattice has claimed another thread. Here is the third story, the echo chamber." Marie had always been a fan of mystery. True crime, unsolved cases, urban legends, she devoured them all. But she always kept a safe distance, treating her interest as a harmless hobby. That changed the day she stumbled upon the echo chamber, a subreddit she had never seen before. It happened by accident. She was scrolling through her usual haunts when a post appeared on her feed. If you're looking for something truly disturbing, try Echo Chamber. But be careful, it listens. Marie assumed it was a gimmick, like so many other creepy subreddits filled with fictional horror stories and amateur args. She was curious, but not overly impressed. Still, when boredom set in later that evening, she typed the name into the search bar. At first, the subreddit looked empty. No posts, no comments, no users. But just as she was about to close the tab, a single thread appeared at the top of the page. "Marie, we've been waiting for you." Her breath caught in her throat. How did it know her name? She checked her account setting. Her Reddit profile was anonymous, no personal information, no linked email, nothing that could identify her. She stared at the post for a moment, debating whether to click. Logic told her it was some kind of trick, maybe a friend playing a prank or a moderator with advanced tools. But curiosity won out. The thread opened to reveal a simple text post. "The rules are simple. Ask a question and we'll answer. But you won't like what you find." Beneath the text was a comment box. Marie hesitated. She didn't believe in the supernatural, but something about this felt off. Against her better judgment, she typed, "Who are you?" A response appeared instantly, as if the answer had been waiting for her. "We are the Echo. We know what you hide." She laughed nervously. Okay, very ominous, she thought, but she couldn't help feeling uneasy. She decided to play along. "What do I hide?" The reply came just as quickly. "You know what happened that night in the woods." Marie's blood ran cold. She hadn't thought about that night in years. She was 17, out with a group of friends in a forest near her hometown. It was supposed to be an innocent hangout, beer, music, laughter. But then something went wrong. A fight broke out between two of her friends, escalating to violence. In the chaos, someone got hurt. Badly. They'd agreed to never talk about it. They'd buried the truth, swearing secrecy for the sake of their futures. And yet, here it was, laid bare by a faceless stranger. Her hands trembled as she typed. "How do you know about that?" This time, the reply took longer, as if the echo were savoring her fear. We know because we were there. We are everywhere. We are everyone. Marie slammed her laptop shut, her heart pounding. She tried to convince herself it was a coincidence, a random guess that it hit too close to home, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The next day, she tried to forget about the incident, burying herself in work, but the subreddit lingered in the back of her mind. When she got home that evening, she found herself reopening her laptop. The subreddit was still there, waiting. A new post had appeared. "Marie, we need to talk." Her pulse quickened as she clicked the thread. The post contained a single sentence. "Check your closet." Her stomach twisted into knots. She didn't want to look, but the compulsion was overwhelming. Slowly, she crossed the room to her closet, her bare feet silent on the carpet. She opened the door. At first, it looked normal. Clothes hung neatly on their hangers, shoes lined up on the floor. But then she noticed something out of place, a small folded piece of paper sitting on the top shelf. She grabbed it, her hands shaking. The paper was yellowed and brittle, as if it had been there for years. She unfolded it and found a message written in neat, precise handwriting. "We warned you not to look." She dropped the paper and stumbled back, her heart racing. How was this possible? She lived alone. No one had access to her apartment. Her laptop chimed from across the room. She turned to see a new message on the subreddit. "It's too late now. The echo is with you." The screen flickered, and then her webcam light turned on. She stared at the tiny green dot, frozen in place. On the screen, her reflection appeared, but something was wrong. Her movements were delayed, her reflection lagging behind as if it were a second version of her, slightly out of sync. Behind her reflection, she saw a shadow move. Marie spun around, but the room was empty. When she turned back to the laptop, the subreddit was gone. In its place was a blank screen with a single message. "You are part of the echo now." She tried to close the browser, but her mouse wouldn't respond. The message remained, burned into the screen like a brand. That night, Marie didn't sleep. Every sound in her apartment felt amplified, every shadow stretched and sinister. She knew the echo was still there, lurking just beyond the edges of her perception, waiting for her to look again. And when she did, it would be ready,